Chapter 11. Texas Ranger. Robert was a flurry of emotions. The arrival of the Rangers brought excitement, but it was swiftly replaced by concern for their safety. His feelings took another turn when only one Ranger arrived, without any others in tow. Confusion settled in, and Robert couldn't help muttering, "A single Ranger, who does he think he is, Chuck Norris?" Sierra overheard Robert's remark from her spot by the window, her attention fixed on him. She couldn't make out his words, but sensed that he had said something, prompting her to ask, "What was that?" Her curiosity piqued. She strained to hear his response. Robert subtly signaled to Sierra, lowering his voice, and without breaking his gaze from the Ranger in the driveway, he raised his arm with his palm facing downward and moved it up and down. "There's only one Ranger out there," he repeated, knowing it was better to keep his sister informed. "One Ranger?" she asked. "Who does he think he is, Chuck Norris?" Sierra let out an exaggerated breath and rolled her eyes. Robert stood with a smirk on his face as he stared at the Ranger. The Ranger almost looked as if he were searching for a lost dog rather than walking into a pretty damned messed-up situation. Robert was so confused. He thought he had been clear and to the point when talking to the Ranger on the phone. He wanted nothing more than to swing the door open and ask where the hell the other Rangers were, but Robert resisted, knowing how it would look, and knowing that he would lose all credibility if he provoked the wandering Ranger. Once the Ranger reached the door, Robert opened it after the first knock. He had been standing on the other side with his hand on the knob since the Ranger had pulled up. Robert opened the door, and the Ranger introduced himself. "Good day. I am Officer Sepulveda with the Texas Rangers." As he introduced himself, he was looking at Robert's eyes for signs that he might be on something. He was sure this was the person he had spoken with on the phone. He recognized Robert's voice. Without identifying drug use, the Sepulveda continued, "I am responding to a phone call from one Robert Squires. Would that be you?" As Sepulveda studied the scene, he began to feel he might have misjudged the call. Robert fought to control his emotions at the sight of only a single Ranger showing after the type of information Robert had relayed over the phone. He pushed those feelings down and just worked with the here and now. "Yes, thank you for coming," Robert said in the most sincere voice he could muster. As he motioned toward his sister, he continued, "And this is my sister, Sierra. She also was there, and—" He was abruptly cut off. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Sepulveda reacted swiftly, raising his hand in a stop gesture. His other hand instinctively moved closer to his sidearm. The sudden realization that the situation might be real had caught him off guard. Robert, sensing the Ranger's unease, began to question the wisdom of his call. Sierra, too, noticed Sepulveda's hand inching toward his sidearm. She knew that things could spiral out of control, just like they had earlier that morning. With the video already set up to capture the Ranger's attention, Sierra slowly reached down and pressed the play button. Sepulveda's attention was immediately captured by the video playing on the screen. "Don't move," he commanded. His voice tinged with alarm, and he began to reach for his sidearm. As he watched the footage, he saw a man's head suddenly disappear and heard the terrified screams of a young girl. The girl standing before him now was clearly the same person in the video, as evidenced by her body language. Sierra had been looking directly at Uncle Bill when he was shot by the sniper positioned on the semi-trailer. The horrifying memory was etched in her mind, and now it played out on the screen for the Ranger to witness. Robert's muscles had tensed up, and he was ready to charge the Ranger, who was drawing a pistol on his sister before the video had started stopping the Ranger in his tracks. Now Sepulveda was just standing there, pistol half drawn, watching the video on the computer monitor. He seemed to be in disbelief that what he had been told was in fact true. After the video came to the part where Robert and Sierra were riding off on a horse, the Ranger moved again, but now his pistol was back fully in the holster. He looked at Sierra and could not believe that the girl in the video was the one standing in front of him now. The brown-haired, green-eyed woman in front of him was no longer the girl she had been just this morning. This was one thing Sepulveda knew for sure. When she noticed the Ranger staring at her, Sierra hit pause. Inside, she was screaming for the video to be over, but on the outside, she was all business. Sepulveda stared at Sierra and then Robert. He wondered how the two of them were able to stay so level-headed at this moment. Robert, he had guessed at this point, was military. The Ranger also assumed that Robert had been in a combat zone. That was why he had so badly misjudged the call and Robert's demeanor on the phone. Sierra, on the other hand, was an enigma. She appeared to be only 19 or 20, too young to deal with this. Yet she had seen brutality on this day that would have turned most into babbling's fools. Sepulveda wondered how anyone her age could keep her kind of composure. After a few seconds of contemplation, Sepulveda looked over at Robert, and with his outstretched arm and finger pointing at Robert, he asked slowly, "Did you not say you were the one who fired first?" Robert looked directly at Sepulveda and replied, "Yes, I took out one of their ATVs. As we were coming over the ridge, we could hear the ATVs running. The men presented themselves as cattle rustlers. After discussing what to do about them, we decided the best course of action would be to disable one of their ATVs. We hoped they would pack it up and go home without further conflict." Apparently that was an epic fail, Robert thought. Sepulveda's extensive training urged him to restrain the two individuals before him, but his instincts and empathy led him in a different direction. There was something about Robert and Sierra that convinced him they were aligned with the right side of the law. Before he made a final decision, he felt compelled to watch the sequence of events that had ignited this entire situation right from the beginning. His attention shifted from Robert to Sierra, who had already begun rewinding the video, anticipating that he would want to see it for himself. It was clear to her that he wouldn't simply accept their word when they had concrete video evidence to support their claims. Sepulveda had almost watched the video up to the same spot as before, but this time he had Sierra stop it on a frame that showed the two agents Robert had killed at the end. Sepulveda could clearly see that they had no identifying marks. At that moment, Robert stepped over, pointed to the screen and said, "As you can see, there are no insignias, nothing, no identification on their clothing. Nothing indicated that they were anything other than high-tech cattle rustlers." Sepulveda was opening his mouth to acknowledge his agreement when, at the same time, all three had their attention drawn to vehicles approaching. Robert suddenly thought that he had been wrong before and that there were indeed other rangers arriving. That was until Sepulveda asked, "Are you expecting anyone?" as he moved toward the front door. Sepulveda opened the door. As he did so, there was a searing pain in his shoulder, which was followed by a very loud noise. Reflexes slammed the door shut again, and they all fell to the floor like swimmers after the firing of a starter pistol. Robert grabbed his Noreen rifle and moved to the front window of the living room, a window that no longer existed. Sierra had been startled for an instant. She hadn't expected that they would be shot at here. As she dropped to the floor, she was trying to think of where her weapon was. Then she remembered that it was still on her horse in the field. She looked over at Uncle Bill's display case across the room and began a low crawl. Sierra swiftly reached the display case where Bill cherished his prized possessions, a pair of Colt .357 Magnums elegantly showcased behind glass. Beside them rested 6 rounds for each gun, nickel-cased Barnes 157-grain hollow points, meticulously hand-reloaded by Uncle Bill himself. He had often boasted that these bullets could halt anything that drew breath. After shattering the glass case, Sierra efficiently began loading bullets into the revolvers. She had a total of 12 shots, and she was determined to ensure each one found its mark. As she slid the first round into place, the kitchen door was violently kicked open with a resounding crash. Sierra instantly rotated the cylinder to align the loaded round for firing, or at least she hoped she had. Sierra pulled the trigger, and her shot found its mark on the upper thigh of the charging man, right where she had intended. The impact was devastating. The moment her bullet struck, the man let out a cry of agony that surpassed any sound she had ever heard from a man or even an animal. Sierra knew she had only one chance, and she aimed to avoid hitting body armor. Most people didn't wear armor on their thighs, and she didn't want her bullet to be wasted. With the .357 Magnum's explosive power and the Barnes quick expansion copper rounds, the man who had threatened them wouldn't get a second opportunity. She quickly finished loading the pistols and prepared for action. By the time she was ready, the man had ceased his movement, and a pool of blood was spreading across the kitchen floor. Sierra's shot had an immediate effect on Robert and Sepulveda. They turned their heads toward her, then to the agonized man on the floor, and finally exchanged a look that seemed to say, "Is this really happening?" Robert couldn't help but be grateful that Sierra had his back. He marveled at how quickly she had adapted, though he couldn't shake the thought that she might still be in some state of shock. Sepulveda, on the other hand, thought, "What the hell is happening? These are clearly federal agents." But they had fired upon him, and they were not doing warning shots. Sierra's attention shifted to the back door, even as bullets continued to penetrate the front of the house. During the chaos of gunfire and agonized cries, her thoughts turned to her aunt, who was in her bedroom adjacent to the living room. Sierra grew increasingly worried that her aunt might be terrified by the deafening noise of the ongoing battle. Crawling carefully across the floor, Sierra made her way to her aunt's bedroom. With her pistol extended in front of her, she cautiously reached for the door. Bullets had already destroyed the door frame, and it hung open, unlatched. Sierra gently nudged the door with the gun's barrel, causing it to swing open. On the other side, she found herself face to face with an all-black figure who had been firing through the door at waist height. Sierra wasted no time and returned fire. The man, noticing her presence, adjusted his aim toward her. Her first shot missed, but the second found its mark. The bullet struck right between the man's nostrils, obliterating the top of his head and the Kevlar helmet he wore. Sierra's attention quickly went to what she knew was her aunt lying twisted in her own blood on the floor. Sierra's eyes shut with the pain of seeing her aunt lying on the floor, and she knew yet again that on this day she had lost another precious member of her family. Sierra moved over and covered her aunt with a blanket from the bed, and then lay next to Margaret on the floor, the pistols firmly in her hands. The men outside firing at the house had now killed Sierra's aunt, uncle, cousin, father, and horse. Now they were trying to kill her and her brother. It had taken some time from the beginning of the day's events, but a transformation had started taking place inside her, one that at this moment was completed. Now she only wanted justice at any cost. All the years of Robert teaching her hand-to-hand combat, wrestling with her, and instructing her in firearms and survival techniques crystallized in her mind. Nothing short of death could stop her. Sepulveda and Robert remained oblivious to the ongoing struggle in the bedroom, their senses overwhelmed by the relentless gunfire outside. Sepulveda attempted to catch the attention of the hostile agents by repeatedly waving his hat just outside the door. After 2 futile attempts that left his hat riddled with bullet holes, he realized it was a fruitless endeavor. The ranger reluctantly accepted that their only option was to neutralize the threat posed by the agents outside. However, this presented a significant challenge, as he had no clear shot, and each attempt to open the door was met with a barrage of gunfire. Sepulveda retreated to a more fortified section of the wall, frustrated and momentarily stymied by the dire situation. On the other hand, Robert had devised a plan of action. He moved toward a section of the wall he knew to be thinner, aware that the agents were just 50 yards from the house. Robert's plan held promise, and after 3 attempts, he successfully signaled Sepulveda. Their eyes locked, and the ranger understood that Robert had a plan. Speaking in hushed tones, Robert outlined his straightforward strategy for Sepulveda's benefit. The ranger would unleash sporadic gunfire out the door, pinpointing the location of an agent and relaying the information to Robert. Armed with his knowledge of the yard's every detail, Robert would then wield his Noreen rifle to engage the threat. 4 agents stood in their path, positioned in front of the house. "First target, the swing set," Sepulveda said, as he retracted his head from the slight opening, just in time to feel the heat of the passing bullet. Robert closed his eyes and imagined that he was standing, looking out of what was left of the front window. He swiveled his Noreen 30-06 just a little to the left and squeezed off 3 rounds so quickly it sounded like full auto. Sepulveda held his breath and took only a split-second glance around the doorframe. "Contact!" he yelled excitedly. Robert looked over at him. "Next! Give me a damn second. I almost lost my head the last time I stuck it out." Sepulveda was looking around for something reflective to use. Luckily for him, there was plenty of glass on the floor, so he didn't have to go far. "Next!" Robert ordered. "Hey, I am not Chuck Norris, damn it!" Sepulveda growled back as he used the glass to spot the next target. Behind the gnome wearing the red pointed hat. Robert adjusted his aim only by visualization and let out with 3 quick blasts. "Low, but you got the gnome?" Sepulveda directed once more. "Damn sorry, Albert," Robert murmured, apologizing to the gnome as he adjusted his rifle and let out 3 more powerful blasts. Contact! Robert saw movement through the hole he had just put through the wall, so he quickly fired 2 more rounds. Contact! Sepulveda acknowledged once again. He was astounded by Robert's ability with the rifle. Movement outside had stopped, and the area around farmhouse fell quiet. Everything had happened so quickly that Sepulveda realized he hadn't called for backup. There had not been time. Well, there was time now. He reached up to his left shoulder for the radio, only to find nothing but wire where it once had been. He had a bullet in his other shoulder. Sepulveda felt lucky that was all that he'd received. The call would have to be made from his truck. As Sepulveda stood, he felt his feet get kicked right out from under him, and he landed on his wounded arm. Still in her dead aunt's room, Sierra stayed low to the floor and slowly peeked out of the door into the living room just in time to see Sepulveda land on the glass-covered floor. She knew that if Robert wasn't on his feet, she wouldn't be on hers. Sepulveda cringed at the pain shooting through his body and growled at Robert but said nothing. At this point, he had to trust Robert. Robert was lying on his back with a big doll of his aunt's, which usually sat in a small rocking chair in the corner. He raised it up slowly and moved it back and forth, keeping it well below the window. "It is not high enough," Sepulveda suggested, then watched the doll lose its stuffing. "Snipers shoot from high, Chuck," Robert said with a grin on his face. Sepulveda figured the sniper must not be able to see him, so why move? Robert had a firm grasp of the situation. He possessed the critical information required. There were only 2 potential locations from which the sniper could have taken the shot, both situated approximately 500 yards away. This knowledge stemmed from years of field testing equipment, such as his rangefinders. Robert proceeded with caution, crawling between Sepulveda and the remnants of the couch, making his way toward the kitchen. Along the way, he gestured to Sierra to retreat back into the bedroom she had recently left. Behind the kitchen counter, Robert faced the shattered front window. Most of the pots and pans that had once occupied the cabinets had been dislodged during the intense firefight. He carefully cleared away the debris obstructing his path, meticulously scanning the area. His eyes settled on a peculiar sight, a section in the upper part of the lower kitchen cabinet, just beneath the counter, where 2 bullets had impacted and formed an upright figure 8. "Perfect," Robert said under his breath, as he raised his rifle up and placed only the very end of the barrel at the bottom of the 8. He began scanning the old wooden water tower first, believing it would be one of 2 spots with the right view into the living room. He zeroed in on the tower, and after a few seconds, thanks to the way 2 squirrels were playing tag on the tower, it was clear to Robert that the sniper was in the barn. Robert adjusted his fire just in time to see a flash. Sepulveda let out a yelp. The agent was not anticipating a counter-sniper threat. He was lying atop a black mat spread over 2 square bales of hay. It was apparent to Robert that this guy had never spent time in a combat zone. Robert placed his crosshairs right on the bridge of the man's nose and began his trigger pull. Right before his finger met the trigger, he stopped and thought, "Intel." Robert had to find out what the hell was going on. He adjusted aim to the shoulder. The shot would destroy the shoulder, but the man would live. Again, Robert began the slow trigger pull. The round was sent. 1 shot was all Robert needed. He jumped up from his spot and moved quickly to Sepulveda on the floor. Both of them gave the other a quick check for unwanted holes. Except for the original bullet Sepulveda had received, they both looked okay. "On me," Robert commanded. Staying low, Sierra exited the bedroom and Sepulveda stood up and looked at Robert. "We are moving 500 yards to the barn," Robert commanded. "I have front left. You have front right, Chuck. Sierra, you bring up the rear." Before Sepulveda could protest, they were already moving, and Sepulveda found himself saying softly under his breath, "Damn TV show." "I am." The trio closed the distance between the house and the barn rapidly, encountering no resistance on the way. As they reached the barn's entrance, Robert maintained his momentum and entered without hesitation, unsure if any hostiles lurked inside. However, he had a gut feeling that if there were any, they would not anticipate such a coordinated advance by Robert, Sepulveda, and Sierra, presenting an unexpected display of overwhelming force. Inside the barn, Robert wasted no time locating the wooden ladder that led up to the loft. He knew the injured man from earlier would be up there, writhing in pain. Turning to Sepulveda and Sierra, he issued his orders. "Keep us covered from down here," he directed, pointing Sierra toward the task. Sierra acknowledged her instructions with a nod, gripping one of the Colt .357 Magnums in each hand. She returned to her position near the entrance, vigilant and ready to fend off any potential threats. Robert knew that the ranger was not going to stay, so he gave him a follow-me movement with his head and began climbing the ladder. Robert slowly raised his head up through the opening and scanned the wounded man for weapons. After being satisfied that there was nothing in the man's good hand, Robert moved on up and began walking across the loft. He could see that his bullet had done a great amount of damage. The damage started at the top of the shoulder and ran down the full length of the bicep. Lucky for the guy, though, it had not made contact with bone. He probably didn't feel so lucky, with the greater part of his bicep split open down to the bone. Robert approached the injured agent, his movements deliberate and calculated. The wounded agent attempted to resist, but the pain was too overwhelming, leaving him powerless. Robert sternly brushed the agent's hand away, urging him to calm down as he reached for a pouch on the agent's vest. With swift precision, he retrieved the first aid kit and began sorting through its contents, his actions speaking louder than words. He was searching for one specific item, the tourniquet. The wounded agent found himself in a bewildering situation. Just moments ago, he had been following orders to eliminate the occupants of the house, and now they were tending to the very wound he had sustained from them. The events of the day had left him as confused as the others. Working swiftly but silently, Robert applied the tourniquet and a pressure bandage to the agent's wounded arm, rendering first aid without uttering a word. Sepulveda observed, recognizing that it was best to let Robert take the lead in handling the situation. However, he harbored a burning desire to extract answers from this man about the unfolding events and why they had opened fire on a Texas Ranger. Robert circled the wounded agent, lost in thought, before pacing back and forth. Finally, he stopped and looked down at the man, his voice calm. "Why are you here?" he inquired, his eyes locked onto the agent's, awaiting a response that could shed light on the perplexing situation. The agent looked up at him. "You and your family killed 4 agents this morning." Robert heard somebody coming up the ladder. As he looked over, he could see Sierra's ratty old cap coming through the opening in the floor. Sierra had noticed Sepulveda had taken up post by the opening above her. She felt it was a good time to move up now that she knew why they had moved to the barn. She wanted answers, too. Robert waited until she was nearby to begin again. The agent couldn't stop staring at the hourglass-figured, brown-haired, green-eyed girl with matching pistols in each hand. She walked across the loft like a giant. She may have only been 5'11", but a giant nonetheless. Watching Sierra approach, he thought how never before in his life he seen such beauty, though she terrified him. Robert returned his attention to the agent. "Why were they not wearing any identifying markings?" he asked, with a hint of disgust in his tone. "What are you talking about? Agents always wear some type of identification when doing field work." The agent's anger toward his captors was starting to show. "Well, you gutless lump of shit! Had they been wearing it, you wouldn't be lying there with a gimp arm, and I wouldn't have just killed 2 of your buddies," Sierra said in a voice and tone that any other time might have been attractive. For the agent on the floor, he wished that he could slide through the cracks in the floor to get away. "That was the intel we received at the briefing before moving out. The crime scene photos I saw of what you people did back it up. You will not get away with it, and I will not be saying another word." The agent fell silent and looked down at the floor. Robert looked at his sister and then at Sepulveda. "Let's take him to the house," Robert said. Sepulveda nodded. On the way, they stopped at Sepulveda's truck. This was his chance to call for support. As he looked in the truck and shouted, "Shit!" Sepulveda turned, grabbed the agent, and continued to the house. The radio in the vehicle had been permanently disabled. Once they had safely returned to the house, they seated the wounded agent in front of the still-functioning computer. They started the playback of the video from the point where the group had been discussing solutions for the cattle rustlers, letting it run until the moment the 2 of them rode away. As the video concluded, the agent remained silent, his face a mix of disbelief and realization. Minutes passed as the agent grappled with his thoughts, piecing together the events that had transpired. He began to understand that he had been manipulated by the agency, used as a pawn in a scheme that had unfolded before him in the video. He gazed around the room, his expression reflecting a sense of inner turmoil. After some contemplation, he knew he had to take action. The agent looked at the trio before him and spoke with a sense of urgency. "I need to make a call right now. Otherwise, I won't be able to help you." He pointed at the radio taken from the agent Sierra had shot while entering through the back door, gesturing with an open and shut motion of his good hand, signaling his need to use it. The three of them stood motionless and stared at him like the guy was nuts. "Look," he said as he threw up his good hand in an I surrender posture, "do you plan on killing me?" he then sarcastically asked. They looked at one another like the guy had lost it. The agent then put his arm down. "Look, I'm going to help you the best way I can, and that is from the inside. If I don't call it in now, somebody might get suspicious, and then I'm no good to you." The agent gave the three of them a moment to think about what he had just said. Of the three, Sierra didn't need a moment. She was already moving to get the radio for the agent. She was like a human lie detector. Nothing got by her. When Sepulveda saw Sierra toss the radio to the agent, he moved to stop her. Feeling Robert place his hand on his shoulder, taking care not to inflame his wound, Sepulveda froze and turned to Robert. In the very short time they had known each other, not even an hour, they had already gotten each other's body language down. Sepulveda then relaxed as the agent prepared to make the call, but he had his hand on his sidearm just in case. "By the way, you can call me Sam," the agent said, then began the call. Once Sam had completed the call, they felt more confident that he was truly on their side and intended on helping them. "Now you have no more than 20 minutes to disappear," he said, as a surge of pain ran through his arm. "Grab what you need and move. I will say I was unconscious when you escaped." Sam looked over at Sepulveda. "I know you want to call in, but you mustn't. They have you marked the same as the other two. You are all now fugitives wanted for the murder of multiple federal agents. Give me a good number to call you in a few days for updates," Sepulveda said. He was not going to be without information from the inside. "We will contact you from a clean phone." As the three of them gathered up weapons, ammunition, gear, and other supplies, Sam filled them in on his plan. "I will take the video and post it on the internet for everyone to see, right after I get a copy of the new video the BLM made." Sam paused, making sure there were no questions. Then he continued, "It will take time, and I will keep you updated. In the meantime, stay safe and out of sight." "Robert," Sam called out, then motioned for him to come in close. As Robert leaned in to hear what Sam had to say, he saw Sam's hand holding something and moving up quick. There was no time to react. Robert was in too close. Sam's hand stopped just short of Robert's chest as he opened it. "Cash!" Robert's breathing returned to normal, and he relaxed as much as he could. "It is all I have on me," Sam said. "Make sure you don't use anything traceable." "Got it," Robert replied. Sam gazed intently into Robert's eyes, his expression grave as he began to speak. "Robert, have you ever heard of the Battle of Concord during the Revolutionary War?" Robert, taken aback by the unexpected question, responded, "Sure, it's where the saying, 'the shot heard around the world,' comes from." He furrowed his brow, wondering where this conversation was headed. Sam's eyes remained fixed on Robert's, and he continued, his tone somber. "Yes, and the moment your bullet exited your rifle this morning, I'm afraid it became the same as the one fired in 1775.